أهلا وسهلا فيكم ببدوي كريبتو. تم تخفيض الفايدة 25 نقطة من قبل الاحتياط الفيدرالي، وكتير أمور غيرها أدت لصعود البيتكوين لقمة جديدة اليوم. كل هالأمور أكثر رح نحكي عنها اليوم مع ترجمة مؤتمر جيروم باول الصحافة بعد قرار الفايدة. رح نشوف كيف رح تكون لهجته من ناحية المستقبل تبع تخفيض الفايدة، وإذا سألوها رح يسألوها عن انتخابات الرئاسية وترامب. كل هالأمور أكثر رح نحكي عنها أنا اليوم. سو قبل ما نبدأ لايك سبسكرايب، خلينا نبلش. يا هلا بأخويا عمر، كيفك حبيبي؟
يا هلا. أهلا بيك وكل المشاهدين، وإن شاء الله اليوم يعملوا لنا لايك.
إذا الله راد. اليوم بدنا نشوف بعض الأمور. أولا طلع قرار جيروم باول رئيس الاحتياط الفيدرالي، قرر يخفض الفايدة 25 نقطة بيسس بوينت. المعدل السابق كان 5%، هلا انخفضت الفايدة ل 4.75%. هالامر اكيد ايجابي للاسواق وسلبي للدولار الامريكي. يلي شفنا عم نشوف الاسواق البيتكوين قمه جديده كمان اليوم 76400. البيتكوين عم تعاود صعودها، عم تضلها تصعد. هذا الامر جميل جدا انه الواحد يشوفه كيف عم تصعد البيتكوين صراحه. الامر اللي عم يلفت لي نظري انا شخصيا اكثر هو الايث بي تي سي بير. اذا بتطلعوا على الايث بي تي سي بير، يعني عم نطلع على الايثيريوم مقابل البيتكوين، اداء الايثيريوم مقابل البيتكوين مش مقابل السعر. بنلاحظ كسرنا ترند الهابط القديم لايثيريوم. هلا بدنا نسكر فوق الترند لاين، يعني كسرناه نعمل ريتست. هالامر بيكون مؤشر كتير ايجابي لباقي سوق العملات الرقميه اللي إلنا فتره بنحكي نحن عنه. اداء كتير جميل. بالرغم من انه الدوميننس بعدها مرتفعه، هبطت امبارح شوي ولكن بعدها مرتفعه. قلت لكم وقت ما تهبط الدوميننس بدنا نشوف حركه جميله جدا بالعملات البديله، والايثيريوم هو قائد هالحركه حتى الان. خبرنا اخي، انت شو رايك؟
100% أنا أوافقك الرأي. يعني هو البيتكوين دوميننس هو مو مثل الميمز. من راح ينزل، ما راح ينزل مباشرة يعمل دمب قوي. راح نشوف أول شيء ينزل شوية، يتحرك عرضي، احتمال يرتفع شوية بس بعدين يرجع ينزل أقوى، بهالشكل هذا لحد ما ينزل. بس الحلو انه حاليا نشوف حركه من قبل الايثيريوم.
صح.
هالشيء انه يعني ينطيك انديكيتر انه موسم العملات البديله بلش يقرب. احنا مو ما بلشنا، بس بلش يقرب. واللي لفت لي نظر اليوم تحرك سولانا، كسرت المقاومه اللي كانت عليها على 186 187. حاليا هي تقريبا صار لها 4 5 ساعات فوق ال 190، حاليا 195 يمكن.
195 صح. ما انتبهت لها لسولانا انا، بس في كتير مشاريع. سولانا احد اهم المشاريع اكيد، بس الايثيريوم هو القائد. انا هذا بشوفه للالتس، مع انه له زمان ميت وكتير عالم قالوا لكم الايثيريوم مات. قلت لكم انتظروا على الايثيريوم. هلا اللي
الايثيريوم
لفت
الايثيريوم ما يموت، يعني هو ثاني اكبر دوميننس بالكريبتو، مستحيل تخفيه بيوم وليله.
100%. اخواتي، بس بخصوص الاخ ايزي كريبتو احمد من ايزي كريبتو، صار معه امر طارئ، عائلي طارئ، واضطر يسافر. كان هو لازم يكون معنا بمؤتمر جيروم باول اليوم، ولكن جد شيء عليه واضطر يسافر. لذلك ما رح يكون معنا اليوم. خلينا نرجع على التشارت كمان، على امور تانية. طلع كمان مش بس الفيدرالي خفض، بنك انجلترا كمان خفضت الفائده. هذا خبر كمان طلع اليوم. ولكن الخبر بالنسبه لي الاهم هو هذا الخبر اللي طلع من تشاينيز تي في، يعني تلفزيون صيني او اذاعه صينيه. طلعت قالت ترامب بده يعمل امريكا عاصمه الكريبتو، وبده يعمل البيتكوين احتياطي استراتيجي. هو كان قايل انه احتياطي استراتيجي رح يعمله للبيتكوين، ولكن هلا اعلنوا انه شكله هذا امر جدي وبده يبث فيه. هالامر اكيد كان احد الامور المساهمه. بتعرفوا اذا عملوا البيتكوين احتياطي استراتيجي شو رح يصير بسعر البيتكوين؟ يعني هذا بخلي الدول كلها تنجبر تحمل بيتكوين، لانه بيصير التداول فيهم يتداول، تكون احتياطي استراتيجي، فيهم يتداولوا فيهم يشتغلوا فيهم في يعني دول عم نحكي بيصير بدها تتنافس بهالامر. خطوه كتير 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 مهمه. هيدي اليوم طلعت، هو حكيها قبل ترامب ولكن عم بيأكدوا عليها الصين. والشغله الثانيه اللي بقول لكم انا عنا احد الاسباب اللي كان بدي دونالد ترامب يطلع هو رئيس السلام العالمي. لاحظ اول شيء عمله العمل مسوده بعد ما طلع رئيس، هذا بعد ما صار رئيس عمل مسوده لينهي الحرب بين روسيا واوكرانيا. احد الامور هي اللي ادت للحرب بين روسيا واوكرانيا انه اوكرانيا بدها تفوت على الناتو، تكون عضو بالناتو. روسيا ما بدها تكون، ما بدها اياها تكون عضو بالناتو بسبب انه بيصيروا يحطوا نووي على حدود الروس. هلا شو قال لهم؟ قال لهم بهالمسوده رح نعمل قرار انه اوكرانيا ممنوع تدخل على الناتو على الاقل 20 سنه. هالامر بيطمن بال فلاديمير بوتين، ما بعرف اذا رح يقبل ولا لا، ولكن وشو في تفاصيل تانية، ولكن بدا على القليله. كل اللي عم اقوله انا بدا خطوات ليحل الازمه. هيدي كمان هول يعني هيدا الخبر وخبر الاحتياطي الاستراتيجي اثنيناتهم هول من افضل الاخبار للاسواق الخطيره، اسواق الكريبتو، كل هالامور. شو رايك خيي انت بالموضوع؟ انت عايش باوروبا وانت حد روسيا، بعرفك
هذا
انت
الخبر كل
بتتاثر
شيء لي.
بالموضوع. هذا بتتاثر بالموضوع اكثر مني.
فعليا بيني وبين الحدود الروسيه ساعتين و10 دقائق.
باطل.
فموضوع مهم بالنسبه لي هذا. بالنسبه للفائده بس ارجع لها شويه. اجت تخفيض الفائده على عقب انه اغلب الدول الاوروبيه خفضت. السويد، الدنمارك، فنلندا كلها خفضت فائده. ما كنت يعني اتصور انه جيروم يسبح عكس التيار.
يب صح. هو اللي حتطلع هلا المؤتمر بس لنحكي بعد 7 دقائق من هلا بيبدا المؤتمر، رح نغطيه ونترجمه نحن على المباشر. خبرني بخصوص القصه قرار ترامب مع روسيا، بين روسيا واوكرانيا. هل انتم بفنلندا مع هيك قرارات ولا ضدها؟ كيف بتشوف الشعب بفنلندا وباوروبا بشكل عام مع هيك امور؟
أنا فنلندا شوية لها خصوصية بالنسبة للدول الأوروبية كمجتمع شوية منغلق، مو مثل بقية المجتمعات والدول الأوروبية. هاي شغلة. الشغلة الثانية فنلندا بصورة عامة ما يحبون ترامب.
هي
يعني
اوروبا كلها ما تحب ترامب هلا
ايه
حاليا هيك.
فهم اصلا يعني حتى على فوزه ما كانوا انه يعني شيء ايجابي بالنسبه لهم.
اوكي. بس اذا صار سلام، هو فنلندا هي داخل الناتو ولا لا؟
دخلت بالناتو بعد الحرب الروسيه الاوكرانيه هي والسويد.
اوكي، يعني هيدي صارت خلص، يعني ما بقى فيهم يتراجعوا عنها. ولكن اذا اوكرانيا منعوها على 20 سنه ما بتاثر بعتقد، لا بل بعتقد بتجيب سلام للمنطقه. انتم ما رح
هي
يقرب عليكم هلا حاليا لانه انتم داخل الناتو.
لا، هو ما هو بوتين ما راح يقرب، روسيا بصوره عامه ما راح تقرب على فنلندا. بس المشكله هي المشكله مو حروب، المشكله اقتصاديه. عندك مثلا كمثال 50 أكثر من 50% من الطاقة والغاز اللي تستخدمه ألمانيا هو مستورد من روسيا. مثال آخر، معامل الخشب فنلندا مشهورة بالخشب وبالغابات. المشكلة ما يقطعون هنا الأشجار، يجيبون الخشب من روسيا على مود يصنعون. فمن صارت هاي
اوكي.
الحصار خلص، لا صادرات لا واردات، فالاقتصاد أخذ ضربة جدا قوية.
يب يب. على فكره اخواتي، في 4300 شخص عم يحضروا اللايف هلا. دزوا هاللايك، شبو عم بيقولوا كل ما تعملوا لايك بيعلى سعر البيتكوين.
لا،
خبطوا هاللايك.
انا راح ابطل ما اطلع لايف. اول لايف طلعت وياك 70,000، ثاني لايف 72,000، بارحه اول تايم هاي، اليوم راح يوصل 80,000 يعني. لايك.
لا انا مفكر اتركك على القناه انا فل هيك مفكر يعني عامل. آه خلي لي هيك يا حبيبي. بس يلا دزوا لايك 4700 على المباشر. هذا رقم كثير جميل صراحه. مره ثانيه بلو امبر بعتذر منك. ايزي كريبتو صار عنده امر طارئ عائلي ليترلي. هذا اللي قال لي اياه، بعت لي رساله قال لي جد امر عائلي وعلى اساسه فرجيك الرساله يعني منه ايزي كريبتو. بدوي اسف انا والله لاحظوا هون والله العظيم مسافر دلوقتي بشكل مفاجئ لظروف عائليه، بتمنى له يكون كل الامر جيد، ما يكون في عائلته بخير وكل الناس بخير، هذا اللي بتمنى له صراحه، وهذا اهم شيء. بانتظار قرار الفيدرالي حاليا البيتكوين 76200، كل الامور رايحه بشكل كتير كتير ايجابي. العالم هيك. الذهب شو متوقع؟ الذهب عم يرتد على حد علمي، بينزل هلا، ارتد عن ترند لاين هيك، ولكن الذهب ما بيحب وقت يكون في امان، ما يكون في خطر، العالم بتروح على الاصول الخطيره. ليه؟ يعني هلا ترامب عم بيحاول يقيم خطر الحروب، عم يجرب يوقف الحروب الكبرى يلي هي ممكن تمتد. اكبر خطر هو روسيا اكيد، بده يجرب يوقف كل هالامور. هيدا بفرجينا ازاله الخطر، العالم بتبطل تركض على الذهب. هيدا احد الامور. الامر الثاني كمان ترامب بدنا بنعرفه كمان، بدنا نشوف النفط، بعتقد بده ينزل سعره بشكل كتير كبير. وتذكرني ليه بده ينزل كتير النفط؟ لانه بده يبلش يرفع كل التنظيمات اللي عملها، لانه زاد كتير قوانين بامريكا جو بايدن ليخفض الانتاج، ليصعب على البترول مانيفاكتشرنج بامريكا الانتاج. هو بقى امريكا بتحمل اكبر استراتيجي نفطي بالعالم اكثر من السعوديه بس، ولكن ما بيقدر يعمل، ما كتير بيصعبوا الامور عليهم. هلا بده يخلي دريل بيبي دريل، قال رح يكون دكتاتور على اول يوم لحتى يخلي النفط ينخفض سعره ويخفض التضخم. يعني تطلعوا هلا على النفط، ممكن نشوف انخفاض بسعر النفط كمان. هالامور انا عم راقبها بشكل كتير كبير كمان. اذا عالم مهتمه يعني بنتابع بعض الامور، على ال يعني الماكرو، هو اللي مش بس كريبتو، يعني بنتابع الامور الماكرو لانه بتاثر بامر او باخر على الكريبتو. يا هلا بالمجتمع، يلا قرب يطلع، خلينا نطلع جيروم باول بعد في دقيقتين ليطلع. بانتظاره ليطلع.
في اضيف شغلتين اليوم مهمه شويه صارت. الشغله الاولى قريتها بس ما لحقت انه اعمل عليها انه يعني بوست او انشرها للمجتمع. كوين بيس صارت تدعم السي تي بي تي سي اللي هو
سولانا بيتكوين
بالضبط على شبكه سولانا. هذا ترى دعم حلو. اول شيء هي بلشت به على كوين بيس على شبكه بيس، بس هسه حاليا صار على سولانا ايضا. هذا شيء مو هين. الشيء الثاني بالنسبه للينك، سووا البايلوت ناجح على بينهم بين تشين لينك سويفت ويو بي اس.
هذا شفته، عملت الخبر انا ونايم يعني بفتره نومي هون، which is very good. لا هذا ليك تشين لينك، تذكرني تشين لينك بده يكون عنده اداء جبار بالدوره هيدي. كان وصلت لل $50 بالدوره الماضيه بلا ما يكون عندها الشراكات سويفت يو بي اس، شراكات كثير هالامور. يعني انا تشين لينك من العملات اللي بتلفت لي نظري بشكل كتير كبير، وبرايي رح يكون اداء مميز جدا. شغله ثانيه حكيت عنها هي الاوبن انترست، شو فيك تخبرنا عنها؟
الاوبن انترست سوى اول تايم هاي بال 24 ساعه اللي فاتت، 45 مليار دولار.
45 مليار دولار. يعني عم
بالضبط
تتخيلوا
يعني
هالرقم؟ انتم عم تتخيلوا شو بيعني 45 مليار دولار اوبن انترست؟ يعني العالم مهتمه بالمجال والاوبن انترست بقيمه 45 مليار دولار. هذا اكيد على عقب اولا الصين عم تحكي انه ترامب رح يعمل استراتيجي نفسي، على عقب تخفيض الفايده، على عقب السلام بالبريكس، على عقب كل هالامور. 45 مليار دولار رقم خيالي. هذا كل اللي بدي اقول لكم اياه، رقم خيالي. اجا المحسوبكم حبيب القلب. بدنا نصغرها بطريقه ما لحتى ما يعملنا كيف بدنا نعملها هيدي. اجا حبيب القلب، يلا.
Good afternoon.
يا هلا.
My colleagues and I remain squarely focused on achieving our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and stable prices for the benefit of the American people. The economy is strong overall and has made significant progress toward our goals over the past 2 years. The labor market has cooled from its formerly overheated state and remains solid.
يلا.
Inflation has eased substantially from a peak of 7% to 2.1% as of September. We are committed to maintaining our economy's strength by supporting maximum employment and returning inflation to our 2% goal. Today, the FOMC decided to take another step in reducing the degree of policy restraint by lowering our policy interest rate by a 1/4 percentage point. We continue to be confident that with an appropriate recalibration of our policy stance, strength in the economy and the labor market can be maintained, with inflation moving sustainably down to 2%. We also decided to continue to reduce our securities holdings. I'll have more to say about monetary policy after briefly reviewing
رح نعملكم إياها هيك لحتى ماشي
policy after briefly reviewing economic
هيك بنشوف
developments.
الشارت بنشوف الجيروم باول كله مع بعضه.
Recent indicators suggest that economic activity has continued to expand at a solid pace. GDP rose at an annual rate of 2.8% in the third quarter.
الجي دي بي او الناتج الإجمالي المحلي ارتفع.
Growth of consumer spending has remained resilient, and investment in equipment and intangibles has strengthened. In contrast, activity in the housing sector has been weak. Overall, improving supply conditions have supported the strong performance of the U.S. economy over the past year.
الاقتصاد الأمريكي عم يشتغل بقوة.
In the labor market, conditions remain
سوق
solid.
العمل يد العاملة.
Payroll job gains have slowed from earlier in the year,
خفت
averaging 104,000 per month over the past 3 months.
خفت بعض الأمور
This
باليد
figure would have
العاملة.
been somewhat higher were it not for the effects of labor strikes and hurricanes on employment.
هالأرقام كانت أعلى لو ما كان في إعصارات وإضرابات.
To all the families, businesses, and communities who have been harmed by these devastating storms.
في كتير عالم تأثرت بالإعصارات اللي صارت.
Is notably higher than it was a year ago, but it has
أرقام
edged down
البطالة
over the past
مرتفعة
3 months
أكثر
and
من
remains low
السنة
at
الماضية
4.1% in
ولكن
October.
لا زالت بشكل عام منخفضة.
Nominal wage growth has eased over the past year, and the jobs to workers gap has narrowed. Overall, a broad set of indicators suggest that conditions in the labor market are now less tight than just before the pandemic in 2019. The labor market is not a source of significant inflationary pressures.
السوق العمل ما بيأثر
Inflation has
بالتضخم.
eased significantly over the past 2 years. Total PCE prices rose 2.1% over the 12 months ending in September, excluding the volatile food and energy categories.
انخفض
Core
التضخم
PCE prices rose
الأساسي.
2.7%.
وال-
Overall, inflation has moved much closer to our 2% longer run goal.
التضخم عم ينخفض
core inflation
أكثر وأكثر
remains
ليوصل
somewhat
على
elevated.
الأرقام اللي بدنا إياها.
Longer term inflation expectations appear to remain well anchored, as reflected in a broad range of surveys of households, businesses, and forecasters, as well as measures from financial markets. Our monetary policy actions are guided by our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. We see the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals as being roughly in balance, and we're attentive to the risks to both sides of our mandate. At today's meeting, the committee decided to lower the target range for the federal funds rate by a 1/4 percentage point to 4.5% to 4.75%. This further recalibration of our policy stance will help maintain the strength of the economy and the labor market, and will continue to enable further progress on inflation as we move toward a more neutral stance.
هالأرقام بتساعدنا نوصل للأرقام اللي
We
بدنا
know
إياها.
that reducing policy restraint too quickly could hinder progress on inflation.
ولكن إذا خفضنا الفائدة بسرعة رح نرجع نجيب
economic activity and
وإذا
employment.
بطأنا بتخفيض الفائدة هالأمر
Considering
رح يزعج
additional
الاقتصاد.
adjustments to the target range for the federal funds rate, the committee will carefully assess incoming data, the evolving outlook, and the balance of risks. We are not on any preset course. We will continue to make our decisions meeting by meeting. As the economy evolves, monetary policy will adjust in order to best promote our maximum employment and price stability goals.
هدفنا نثبت
If the
الأسعار
economy remains strong and inflation is not sustainably moving toward 2%, we can dial back policy restraint more slowly. If the labor market were to weaken unexpectedly, or inflation were to fall more quickly than anticipated, we can move more quickly. Policy is well positioned to deal with risks and uncertainties that we face in pursuing both sides of our dual mandate. The Fed has been assigned two goals for monetary policy:
الفيدرالية عنده
maximum employment and
هدفين،
stable prices.
يثبت
We remain
الأسعار
committed to
ويزيد
supporting
اليد
maximum
العاملة.
employment, bringing inflation sustainably to our 2% goal, and keeping longer-term inflation expectations well anchored. Our success in delivering on these goals matters to all Americans. We understand that our actions affect communities, families, and businesses
قراراتنا
across the
بتأثر
country.
على
Everything we
الأعمال،
do is
على
in service
الأشخاص
to our
في كل
public
البلد.
mission. We at the Fed will do everything we can to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals.
نحن رح نعمل كل شيء بإيدنا لنوصل لأهدافنا. بشكركم وهلا بجاوب على الأسئلة. الأسئلة مهمة كتير.
Thank you. Given the expectation that the election outcome will produce policies that would meaningfully impact the U.S. economy next year, how is the committee taking these proposals into account for upcoming decisions, including potentially the next one in
عم
December?
تسألوا عن
And
الانتخابات
then can you give us
المصيرة على
any more
القرارات
sense of how
تبع
proactive or
الفيدرالية.
reactive the Fed is prepared to be to changes in economic policies with the next administration?
Sure. So let me say that in the near term, the election will have no effects on our policy decisions.
الإدارة
Many
حيلا إدارة
things
بتجي ما
affect
رح
the
تأثر
economy,
على
and anyone who
قراراتنا.
writes
ما
down
بعرف الأمر كيف
forecasts
بصراحة.
in their job will tell you that the economy is quite difficult to forecast looking out past the very near term. Here, we don't know what the timing and substance of any policy changes will be. We therefore don't know what the effects on the economy would be, specifically whether and to what extent those policies would matter for the achievement of our goal variables, maximum employment and price stability. We don't guess, we don't speculate, and we don't assume.
ما بنحذر ما
Now, just in principle, it's possible that any
الأرقام.
administration's policies or policies put in place by Congress could have economic effects that over time that would matter for our pursuit of our dual mandate goals. So we, along with countless other factors, forecasts of those economic effects would be included in our models of the economy and would be taken into
عم
account.
يحكي إنه أي
through that
أمور
channel.
كله عم يقراه كأنه حاكين عنه، كأنه عارف السؤال. ملاحظين إنه هو الأسئلة لازم تكون مش محضرة لك عم يقرا.
Nick Timrose from the Wall Street Journal. Roughly 1 year ago, when the 10-year Treasury was flirting with 5% and 30-year mortgage rates were near 8%, you noted how higher borrowing costs, if they were sustained, could weigh on economic activity. Given that you've said you believe policy is restrictive and the Fed is now dialing back that restriction, are the growth risks presented by higher U.S. Treasury yields today any different from those you identified 1 year ago when inflation was still meaningfully above your target?
So I would just say this: we've watched the run up in bond rates, and it's nowhere near where it was, of course, a year ago. I guess the long run rates are well below that level. So we're watching that. Things have been moving around, and we'll see where they settle. I think it's too early to really say where they settle. Ultimately, I'm sure we've all read these decompositions of what and I certainly have, but it's not really our job to provide our specific decomposition. I will say though that it appears that the moves are not principally about higher inflation expectations. They're really about a sense of more likelihood of stronger growth and perhaps less in the way of downside risks. So that's what they're about. We do take financial conditions into account if they're persistent and if they're material. Then we'll certainly take them into account in our policy. But I would say we're not at that stage right now. It's just something that we're watching. And again, these things don't really have mainly to do with Fed policy, but to do with other factors in the economy.
If I could follow up, is the September SEP, are those
بس هوقف ثواني. هذا نورس دائما بيضحكني. ان شاء الله تطلع الصحفيه اللي كان بدي اطلب ايدها.
يلا تطلع شو تطلع.
وينه عبد الكريم كمان انت وياه عم تتنافسوا عليها لهالصحفيه.
بريض.
The economic activity data have been stronger than expected. The NIPA revision was stronger. Certainly the September employment report was stronger. The October report, not stronger. Retail sales stronger. So overall, though, I think you take away a sense of some of the downside risks to economic activity having been diminished with the NIPA revisions in particular. And so overall feeling good about economic activity. So I think we would factor that in. At the same time, we got one inflation report, which it wasn't terrible, but it was a little higher than expected. So I think really the question is December, and by December we'll have more data. I guess one more employment report, two more inflation reports, and lots of other data, and we'll make a
شهر
decision.
12 رح يطلع لنا عندنا عدة تقارير مهمة عن التضخم عن البطالة، وعلى عقب هول بناخذ قراراتنا للمستقبل.
Gina Smilik from the New York Times. Thanks for taking our question to Chair Powell. When it comes to December, what will you be looking at specifically as you try to make that decision? And then as of the Fed's economic projections in September, you had written down 4 quarter point interest rate cuts in 2025. Do you still think that those are likely? Is that sort of the baseline outlook at this point, or has that shifted? And if it shifted at all, can you give a little bit of detail as to why?
I can't. We don't fill out an SEP, and I can't characterize one that wasn't filled out today. So I can't really speak for kind of exactly where the committee is. I will just say for December we're going to be again at every meeting we're going to be looking at the incoming data and how that affects the outlook. As you know, we're in the process of recalibrating from a fairly restrictive level at 5.33%. After today's move, we're down 75 basis points. And we're asking ourselves, is that where we need to be? That we're trying to steer between the risk of moving too quickly and perhaps undermining our progress on inflation, or moving too slowly and allowing the labor market to weaken too much. We're trying to be on a middle path where we can maintain strength in the labor market while also enabling further progress on inflation. I think that's where we are. That's the question
لما يزيد التضخم بعدين. هذا اللي عم يجرب يعمله، قاعد عم يمشي والازاز على الارض وين ما كان بيمشي على tip of his toes لحتى ما يعمل غلط.
Totally appreciate that. I guess when it comes to your own thinking, do you think that a full percentage point of rate cuts in 2025 is a reasonable outlook?
Again, we're going to wait and see how things come in December. I mean,
انتظر لشهر 12 وقرر على هالاساس على تخفيض الفائدة بعدين.
Put it this way, we're on a path to a more neutral stance. And that's very much what we're on. That has not changed at all since September. We're just going to have to see where the data lead us. We have, a whole 6 weeks of data to look at to make that decision in December. Obviously, I'm not ruling it out or in, but I would say, that, again, we didn't update the SEP, so I'm not going to characterize, where the committee would be.
Thanks, Howard Schneider with Reuters. I wondered if you could please elaborate, explain a little bit the 2 changes in the language of the statement here. In the first paragraph, when you say inflation has made progress, dropping the word further progress. And in the second paragraph, dropping the sentence that the committee had gained greater confidence that inflation was progressing towards its 2% goal. Is there any policy substance behind either of those changes in language? Is it meant to open the door to a December pause? Is it meant to communicate anything about the stickiness of core inflation in the last 3 months?
Not really, no. So let me tell you what we were thinking. So the test of gaining further confidence was our test for the first rate cut, right? And so we met that test in September, and therefore we take that test out. If you leave it in, then it's new forward guidance. It's brand new forward guidance. What do you mean by it? Are you requiring yet further? We have to say yes or no at every meeting whether we've made further progress. The point is we have gained confidence that we're on a sustained path down to 2%.
إنه طريقنا على 2% نحن ماشيين عليها بطريقة جيدة.
It's not meant to send a signal. Neither of those is meant to send a further signal. And saying further progress, it becomes a test. We don't want to be. We don't think it's a good time to be doing a lot of forward guidance. There's a fair amount of uncertainty in that. In what I've said. We do know where the destination is, but we don't know the right pace, and we don't know exactly where the destination is. So the
خي عمر شكلنا بدنا نفتح على القناة شيء للزواج. كل واحد بيحكيني بده يتجوز وبده يعني أنا
كلها
الشباب كلها
متأزمة عاطفيا. كان عندهم شيء بير ماركت عاطفي لازم افوت فول ماركت.
Steve Leisman, CNBC. Mr. Chairman, you talked about higher rates, perhaps from an expectation of higher growth. You didn't talk about it in terms of expectations of higher deficits. Is that something you think might be behind the recent rise in interest rates? And is that are rising deficits a concern to you?
عم نشوف ارتفاع بنسبة الديون بشكل عام.
I don't have a lot more to say on what's driving bond yields. In terms of
هل بيعطي لك مخاوف
policy changes though?
من ناحية
Let me give
السياسات؟
you a sense of how this works in the ordinary case. Let's say Congress is considering a rewrite of the tax laws. Doesn't matter what's in the content. So we would follow that. At a certain point, we'd think we see the outline, so we'd start to model it, and then we'd wait, and then at a certain point, the staff would brief the FOMC and say, these are the likely effects. There's lots and lots of literature on the effects of tax policy changes on various parts of the economy. So we'd try to get smart on that, and then the law actually passes. And you'd start to put it. You probably run an alternative simulation before that happens, just to keep people trying to understand it. Then when it actually passes, it goes into the model, along with a million other things. So we have a very large economy. Many things are affecting it.
اقتصاد كتير كبير في كتير أمور بتأثر فيه بكامل الأوقات.
Of some kind would go in there, but it would go in. But it's a process that takes some time.
أمور معطيات بتأثر بهالمجال ولازم نراقبها كلنا.
The real question is not the effect of that law. It's all of the policy changes that are happening. What's the net effect?
التغييرات السياسية اللي عم بتصير والpolicies شو هو شو راح يطلع منهم هلا عم بيقول.
We go through all the time with every administration, constantly, and this will be no different. But right now there's nothing to model right now. It's such an early stage. We don't know what the policies are, and once we know what they are, we won't have a sense of when they'll be implemented or all those sorts of things. So I think I would just say we're not doing that now, and all that will take time, and it will be very much regular order when we do that.
All right,
but just follow up on Nick's question. Are the current rates something you feel like you need to lean against
أو قبل هيك بغير
the direction of policy by being adding restrictions to the economy, or do you just take them as a given and perhaps a signal that you should do less?
I just think the first question is how long will they be sustained? If you remember the 5% 10-year, people were drawing massively important conclusions, only to find 3 weeks later that
صراحة لحد الآن بحسه مايل للإيجابية منه ما في مايل ما عم يعطينا معلومات كثيرة
that really matter, and we don't know that.
مايل للإيجابية.
What we've seen so far, we're watching it, we're reading, we're doing the decompositions and reading others, but right now it's not a major factor in how we're thinking about things.
Chris.
Thank you, Chris Rugaber at Associated Press. You mentioned the positive economic data that we've seen since the September meeting, including the revisions to things like savings, higher GDP growth. We saw a stock market jump yesterday. That's renewed some of the questions about why do many cuts at all in this with this
هذا عم بيقول له ليه عم بتخفض الفائدة لأنه شفنا الأرقام جيدة من الاقتصاد امبارح ارتفاع الأسهم يعني بده تزيد الفائدة ايش قصتك أنت روح.
But of course our mandate is maximum employment and price stability, and we think that even with today's cut, policy is still restrictive. We understand it's not possible to say precisely how restrictive.
لا ترد علي يا جيروم، بدنا نخفض الفايدة، ما ترد عليه. شفتوا هذاك بلا سؤال؟
اي سؤال حقير بصراحة، كثير سؤال
بده يعلي الفايدة يعني عشوائي.
Modest rate, and we don't need further cooling, we don't think, to achieve our inflation mandate. So that's the labor market. Inflation has moved down a great deal from its highs of 2 years ago, and we judged, as I mentioned, that it's on a sustainable path back to 2%. So the job's not done on inflation. But if you look at those two things, we judged in September that it was appropriate to begin to recalibrate our policy stance to reflect this progress. And today's decision is really another step in that process. Overall, as I mentioned, we believe that with an appropriate recalibration of our policy stance, we can maintain strength in the labor market, even as our policy stance enables further progress toward our inflation goal.
Great. And just to follow up, what might cause you to pause rate cuts in December? What kind of economic data would lead you to that path? Thank you.
So we haven't, made any decision like that at all. But we're in the process, as I mentioned, of moving policy down, our stance down over time to more neutral level. And as a general matter, as we move ahead, we are prepared to adjust our assessments of the appropriate pace and destination as the outlook evolves. So, for example, if we were to see the labor market deteriorating, we'd be prepared to move more quickly.
حسب المعطيات إذا شفنا اليد العاملة عم تنخفض نتحرك على هالأساس. إذا شفنا
it may turn out to be appropriate to slow the pace at which we're dialing back restriction.
إذا يعني كل ما نشوف في حسب المعطيات اللي بتجينا معقول نغير سياساتنا بس حتى نوصل للأهداف اللي بدنا إياها وبلا ما نأثر على شيء.
With asset runoff, with QT. So we reach a point where we slow the pace, much like an airplane reaching the airport slows down. And so
يمكن نضطر نخفض السرعة اللي عم نتحرك فيها حسب المعطيات اللي عم نشوفها.
Thanks, Chair Powell. So with the noise in the jobs reports that we've seen, and you look at the Fed's favorite inflation, PCE inflation, overall it's 2.1%, very close to the Fed's target, but core inflation is 2.7%, and it's been that way since July. So why doesn't this data give fuel to a rate pause for this meeting?
Well, so I think if you look at the 3 and 6 month, you're quoting the 12-month. So we look at all of them, right? But if you look at 3 and 6 month core PCE, you'll see they're around 2.3%.
أو 6 شهور
So we look at all of them.
التضخم الأساسي انخفض ولكن طلع على السنة
as well. But what it's telling us is that we really have made significant progress, and we expect there to be bumps. For example, the last 3 months of last year, the core PCE readings were very, very low, probably unsustainably low. So that's why forecasts generally see a couple of upticks toward the end of the year. On the other hand, the January reading certainly looks like an example of residual seasonality, so that we saw last year. So when that falls out of the 12-month calculation in February, we should see a thing down. So it'll literally be a bump up and then down. We understand that. Overall,
بشكل عام أنا بيهمني ما بيهمني نراقب
what is the inflation story now? Where's it coming from?
التضخم المسار شكله انخفاض.
One is the non-housing goods, which together make up 80% of the core PCE index, are back to the levels they were at the last time we had sustained 2% inflation, which happens to be in the early 2000s for a period of 5, 6, 7 years. So they're back to that level. What's not is housing services. So let's talk about housing services. Housing services is higher. What's going on there is, market rents, newly signed leases are experiencing very low inflation. And what's happening is older, leases that are turning over are taking several years to catch up to where market leases are, market rent leases are. So that's just a catch-up problem. It's not really reflecting current inflationary pressures. It's reflecting past inflationary pressures. So that's
من بعض الأمور عم ترجي الأمور السابقة مش الأمور الحالية. المسار الحالي أفضل.
Where's it coming from? It's not a very tight economy. What is the story about inflation? You see that catch-up inflation also in insurance and several other areas. So you're seeing we're not declaring victory, obviously, but we feel like the story is very consistent with inflation continuing to come down on a bumpy path over the next couple of years and settling around 2%. That story is intact, and it will be one or two really good data months or bad data months aren't going to really change the pattern at this point now that we're this far into the process.
So you're quickly trying to get to that neutral rate that you see, or do you foresee that you have some time to get there?
Nothing in the economic data suggests that the committee has any need to be in a hurry to get there.
لما مستعجلين نوصل لهونيك
activity. We are seeing ongoing strength in the labor market. We're watching it carefully. We do see maintaining strength there. And so we think that the right way to find neutral, if you will, is carefully, patiently. That's not meant to have a specific meaning. To the extent the economy remains strong, we have the ability to take advantage of that as we try to navigate that middle path between the two risks.
Craig.
Hi, Chair Powell. Craig Torres from Bloomberg. Two questions today. Did you learn anything about what Americans think about the economy from the election results?
هل فهمت في شو باعتقاد الامريكان؟
I want to talk about some labor market indicators, and I do so with great respect for your attentiveness to the maximum employment side of the mandate, Chair Powell. So the unemployment rate has been at 4% or higher for 6 months. One of the broadest measures of unemployment is up about 0.5 point from a year ago. Compensation gains are sliding back. The quits rate, a signal of labor market dynamism, has been heading down to that bad neighborhood of the 20 teens. So you have put a marker at Jackson Hole saying any further cooling is unwelcome. It is cooling generally a little bit further. So at what point do we reach what you would describe as a shortfall from maximum employment? Thank you.
Sure. So on the first question, I'm not going to talk about anything that relates directly and indirectly to the election. On the second one, this is the great question, and so one we think about all the time. So I'll just say a couple things. There's nothing really surprising here. What we know is that the unemployment rate is low. We also know that it's moved up significantly from a year or so ago. So we've seen a big change upward in unemployment. Sometimes that has meant bad things. So far, it doesn't appear to be. It appears that I wouldn't say that the labor market has fully stabilized, because I do think it's continuing to very gradually cool, but it seems to be in a good place. And our policy, of course, is designed to keep it in that good place, to maintain the strength in the labor market while also enabling further progress on inflation. You mentioned a bunch of indicators, and you're right. The openings to unemployment rate is back to a normal level. I would characterize it more broadly as normalizing. You mentioned wages. Wages are still running just a bit above where they would need to
المعاشات بعدها مرتفعة شوي أكثر مما نحن بدنا إياها على نسبة 2% تضخم.
If we see productivity, more sustainably,
إذا الإنتاجية فيها تطلع بهالمستوى أنا ما في مشكلة إنه تطلع الويج جاب عالي.
That wage increases are now consistent with 2% inflation given current productivity readings. But of course, the lore on productivity readings is whenever you see high readings, you should assume they're going to revert pretty quickly to the longer-term trend. That has always been the case for 50 years. But it may be that we're now 5 years. If you look at the NIPA revisions that came out a month ago, we're 5 years into a nice set of productivity readings, which are sustained and very healthy. But overall, it's a good labor market. We could talk about 20 different data series. All of them, of course. But we don't want the labor market to soften much from here.
ما بدنا يضعف أكثر
to get inflation
اليد العاملة.
back to 2%.
بس التضخم بدنا ينزل ل 2%.
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
يمكن يطلب منك تترك. إذا طلب منك تترك هل تترك؟ قال له لا. بس في حديث إنه ترامب
from Bloomberg Radio and Television. You talk a lot about what the data are telling you and how you are dependent on the data, but in terms of forward-looking assessments of the economy, what are you hearing from CEOs or other officials around the country? What did you hear today from the regional bank presidents about what companies and consumers think about where the economy is going from here rather than looking backwards? And does that match up with what your forecasts have been and what you think the appropriate policy path should be?
وشو برأيك إذا صار
شو برأيك characterize a really interesting set of discussions we had, and of course you'll see them in the minutes in 3 weeks. But I would say this: I think the comments from our Reserve Bank colleagues and from the CEOs that they talk to are pretty constructive on the economy right now. Pretty constructive, feeling that the labor market is
بيقرب على
back to normal to the point where it's no longer that much of a discussion topic in their worlds, whereas 2 years ago, it was all they were talking about. So they feel like the labor market's in balance. People feel good about where the economy is. Demand is obviously pretty strong. And, you're seeing, 2.8% growth in the third quarter estimated. Maybe the year's 2.5%. This is a strong economy. It's actually remarkable how well the U.S. economy has been performing with, strong growth, a strong labor market, inflation coming down.
الديت هون غلط من الويب سايت تبعهم هن مش من الويب سايت تبعنا نحن. هذا ويب سايت FOMC هذا مباشر حاليا. بس التاريخ هن يمكن منهم معدلين وما تفكروا يعني هذا هلا اللي طلع هلا يعني تذكروا دونالد ترامب طلع من امبارح حاولت امبارح طلع 7 نوفمبر ما كان بعد طلعت الانتخابات وما كانوا خفضوا الفايده. التاريخ هن كاتبينه غلط هو مش التاريخ المضبوط بس في بعض الناس عم بيعلقوا عن هذا الموضوع. لا هذا مباشر حاليا بس هيك
follow up the areas of caution. If there were black clouds on the horizon that you identified as something you're watching, what would they be?
I think it's things like clearly geopolitical risks around the world are elevated. Just as clearly they've had relatively little effect on the U.S. economy.
وهذا بيأثر على
that can change through the price of oil or otherwise.
هالأمور ممكن تغير من ناحية أسعار النفط
وغيرها. Those as something that's on the horizon all the time. But ultimately, if you look at the U.S. economy, its performance has been very good.
ولكن إذا بتنظر بشكل عام بالرغم من
الاقتصاد
الأمريكي وبعده كتير جيد.
If anything, people feel next year, I've heard this from several people that next year could even be stronger than this year.
Andrew.
السنة الجاية رح يكون الأداء أفضل.
Hi, it's Andrew Ackerman with the Washington Post. I just wanted to follow up on the discussion earlier on fiscal policy. Your predecessors, Greenspan and Volcker, spoke up loudly when they thought large budget deficits endangered economic or financial stability. Will you do that too? And right now we're in a period of full employment. We have large budget deficits and debt at historic highs that are rising. Is that something you'd speak out against?
So, I have said many times, no more, no less than what the predecessors have said. And what that is the U.S. federal government's fiscal policy is on an unsustainable path.
هي طريقة الصرف عم يعملوا طريقة unsustainable ما فيهم يكملوا فيها.
And we see that you've got a very large deficit you're at full employment, and that's expected to continue. So it's important that we, that to be dealt with. It is ultimately a threat to the economy. Now, I can say that I don't have oversight. We don't have oversight over fiscal policy.
ما عندنا تأثير على النظام الضريبي أو هالأمور.
I guess the other question is,
إذا كملت هيك جيد.
Do you believe the president has the power to fire or demote you, and has the Fed determined the
legality
of the president demoting at will any of the other governors with leadership positions?
Not permitted under the law.
لا ما في بحسب
القانون. Not permitted under the law.
Thank you.
غير مسموح
from Axios. In response to Howard's question, you said it wasn't an ideal time to give forward guidance because of the economic uncertainties. Can you lay out what some of those uncertainties are and whether or not it includes some of the proposals that the president-elect has put out on the campaign trail? Tariffs, for instance?
No, I was not referring to the new administration's policies at all, nor will I today. So what I'm just saying is, as we look ahead, we know, and I mentioned this in my statement, that the risks are two-sided. I guess I should start by saying that we think that the economy and we think our policy are both in a very good place, And but as you look forward, you say, what are the risks? And one risk is that we would move too quickly and find ourselves having moved too quickly, and inflation comes back, and we
إذا تحركنا بسرعة بيرجع التضخم.
إذا ما تحركنا بسرعة نحن
أمام بعض الأمور ممكن تأثر
بشكل كبير. and that we allow the labor market to weaken too much and do unnecessary damage to the labor market and to people's work. That says don't get behind the curve. So these two things are the two risks that we have to manage, and so we're in the middle there. We try to be in the middle and deal with manage both of those. Again, the idea is to support the strength we have in the labor market and in the economy, but also with somewhat less restrictive but still restrictive policy, enable further progress toward our 2% inflation goal. This is a thing we're meeting by meeting. We're going to be making our assessment of what the right path is. It's not as important. The precise timing of these things is not as important as the overall arc of them. And the arc of them is to move from where we are now to a sense of a more neutral policy. We don't know exactly where that is. We only know it by its works. We're pretty sure it's below where we are now. But as we move further, there will be more uncertainty about where that is, and we're going to move carefully as this goes on, so that we can increase the chances that we will get it right.
بصير نزيد الاحتمالية إنه نصيب أكثر.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Simon Raminovich with The Economist. I know you don't want to share your decomposition of bond yields, but if you look at the break-evens, it is clear that longer-term inflation expectations do seem to have risen up at about 2.5%, for example, on the 5-year. That's about half a point from when you cut in September. Do you have any concern at all
هل عندك خوف على هيدي على أرقام التضخم البعيدة على 5 سنين ممكن ترتفع؟
Thanks.
So we would be concerned if we thought we saw longer-term inflation expectations anchoring at a higher level. That's not what we're seeing. We're still seeing, between surveys and market readings, broadly consistent with. I looked at the 5-year earlier today, and it's probably moved, but it's just not. It's kind of right where it's been, and also it's pretty close to consistent with 2% PCE inflation. So that's one that's been a traditional one that we look at a lot. But overall, expectations seem to be and have throughout this in a place that's consistent with 2% inflation. But you're right to say we watch that very carefully, and we will not allow inflation expectations to drift.
ما راح نخلي التضخم أرقام التضخم تصعد بشكل كبير.
2022 was to avoid that.
Kelly.
Hi, Chair Powell. Kelly O'Grady, CBS News.
We just talked about what we heard from
business leaders on the economy, but many average Americans are still not feeling the economy in their wallets.
So you're right that we say the economy is performing well, and it is, but we also know that people are still feeling the effects of high prices, for example.
لازلنا عم نشوف العالم عم تحس
inflation shock, and inflation went up everywhere, and it stays with you because the price level doesn't come back down. So what that takes is it takes some years of real wage gains for people to feel better. And that's what we're trying to create. And I think we're on the road to creating that. Inflation's come way down. The economy's still strong here. Wages are moving up at a sustainable level. So it's just, I think what needs to happen is happening, and for the most part has happened. But it'll be some time before people, regain their confidence and feel that. And we don't tell people how to feel about the economy. We completely respect what they're feeling. Those feelings are true.
عم نحس مع العالم ومحترم لهم آرائهم، بس احنا عندنا مثل مهمة لازم نعملها.
President-elect Trump has been critical of your performance. Any concern about his influence on the Fed's independence?
President Trump كان عنده مثل بعض الكلام عن أدائك. هل عندك تعليق على الموضوع؟ قال ما رح يدخل بأمر الانتخابات، ما بيسترجي يدخل هلا، ما حدا بيسترجي يتعاطى مع ترامب.
If we start to see stagflation?
So that's the whole plan is
خفض already خي 25
نقطة. Deal with it. So that is actually our plan. It's of course a very difficult thing because you're anything you do with interest rates will hurt one side or the other, either the inflation mandate or the employment mandate. I would just say that we've been able to see inflation come down a whole lot much closer to our
عم نشوف التضخم
goal
عم ينزل بشكل
without
كتير
the kind
كبير
of sharp
قريب على
increase in
الأرقام اللي
unemployment that
بدنا
is
إياها
often
بدون ما
accompanied
نشوف
programs of disinflation. So knock on
هي عم
wood, we've
تسألوا
gotten
عن
this far without seeing a real weakening
stagflation
in
عم
the
تسألوا
labor
عن
market. And we
الركود
believe we
نوع
can
من أنواع
complete the inflation task while also keeping the labor market strong. And that, of course, is exactly what we're trying to do.
Can you rule out an interest rate hike next year?
No, I wouldn't rule anything out or in that far
هيك
away.
مصطفى رح
That's
يعطوك
certainly
هيدي هلا اللي
not,
عم
not our
تسأل.
plan. I mean, our baseline expectation is that we'll continue to move gradually down towards neutral, that the economy will continue to grow at a healthy clip, and that the labor market will remain strong. If you look at
نورس
our
عجبت
plan,
هيدي
that
بده
will not
ياخذ
change from
100,000
the
ليحجز طيارة.
September SEP. That is our baseline forecast, and short of some exogenous event, that will continue to be our forecast for the foreseeable future. So, but ultimately, we're not in a world where we can afford to rule things out a full year.
ما فينا نغض النظر عن شيء. احنا معطيات كده حديثه عم يعيد حاله. آخر سؤال هلا.
Hi, Chair Powell. Jean Young with MNI Market News. I wanted to go back to a comment that you had made about Americans being quite unhappy about the cumulative price level rises over the past few years, even though now inflation is back on a path to 2%. Would it be appropriate for the Fed to undershoot for a while on its inflation goal under the average inflation targeting regime?
هل معقول الفيدرالي يروق على فترة حتى يشوف كيف عم يصير الأسعار قبل ما يعمل يشوف وين الأداء تبع التضخم. ما بدنا نعمل undershoot يعني نعمل ما نصيب أهدافنا وما يكون عم نتصرف. لذلك نحن دائما proactive عم نتصرف حسب المعطيات.
Thank you very much.
بشكركم جميعا. خلصنا منه. يلا نرجع لهون نقدر نشوف
typical جيروم.
لا بتاخذ منه لا حق ولا باطل.
بس بصراحة شوية كان إيجابي بصراحة.
أنا لك إيجابي بشكل عام بعتقد هلا الإيجابية رح تبلش خاصة مع ترامب to be honest من ناحية. لكن الأمور اللي حكيناها اليوم من أهم الأمور اللي صارت. يعني عم تتخيل أنت أول شيء الأوبن انترست وصلت لأكبر نسبة إلى بتاريخ 45 مليار دولار أوبن انترست. تخفيض الفائدة بأمريكا، تخفيض الفائدة ببريطانيا. ترامب في احتمال كتير بحسب تلفزيون صيني إنه ترامب رح يعمل البيتكوين استراتيجيك ريزيرف، احتياطي استراتيجي. هالأمر بيجبر كتير دول غيره تلحقه. عندك عمل مسودة للسلام بين أوكرانيا وروسيا وبقيم هالضغط الكبير السياسي العالمي. يعني في كثير أمور خارج نسي ترامب وجيروم باول تخفيض الفائدة. بلشت أنا بشكل عام بلشت الإيجابية بالاقتصادات العالمية. في مخاطر ركود أوكي، ولكن هذه أنا برأيي رح تبعد شوي، ما رح تصير هلأ. ترامب رح يبلش يعمل دريل بيبي دريل، أسعار النفط رح تنخفض أنا برأيي بشكل قريبة أول ما يستلم. هو ما رح يستلم هلأ، بيستلم بعتقد بشهر 1 أو 2 ماني ذاكر تحديدا.
20/1 السنة الجديدة.
20/1 السنة الجديدة بيستلم. بعدها رح يبلش. يعني هلأ كل هذا عم يعمله اللي عملوا مع المسودة لأوكرانيا وروسيا لحل الأزمة، عملها بعد ما استلم. هو قال لهم أنا بدي أحل المشكلة قبل ما أستلم. بلش يتحرك الزلمة، بلش يتحرك
100%. في شغلتين أنا بس حابب أضيفها. الشغلة الأولى قرأت خبر على السريع قبل البث من CNN يقول لك ترامب يفكر يخلي جيروم باول لحد فترة يعني نهاية ولاية جيروم باول 2026.
أنا سمعته هالخبر كمان. ما بعد مثل ما قال جيروم باول ما بعتقد القرار بإيده لترامب، ما بعتقد القرار رح يكون بإيده، ما إنه في يسحبه، في يعمل عليه ضغوطات كبيرة، في يعمل عليه بعض الأمور يعني يحد له من صلاحيات، في يعمل هالأمور، ولكن ما في ما بيقدر يطرده بشكل مباشر. جاري جانسلر بيقدر يطرده بعتقد،
قاري وراح يضغط عليه، راح يطرد. انا يعني دا اشوف طارده يعني شايف هذا الموضوع.
جاري انسى غرامك راح خلص. سي ليتر.
بدي اعطي شيء الفا، هذا ما حد لا نشره بالتويتر قبل ولا بمكان، والسوشيال ميديا ما سوشيال ميديا.
يلا
الاي اي شو يحركه؟ التحريك الرئيسي الاي اي، مشاريع الاي اي كلها بصوره عامه شو يحركها؟
انفيديا والتشيبس.
صح.
صح.
الارباح انفيديا للكوارتر الثالث راح تطلع يوم 2011.
2011 طالع ارباح انفيديا. اوكي سجلوا هالارقام.
فخلوا عيونكم على مشاريع الاي اي قبل هاي الفتره.
اوكي هذا امر مهم. اوكي that's absolutely great. اخواتي ما بدنا نشكركم على دعمكم لنا ولا متابعتنا مع البث. نحن مثل ما بتعرفوا دائما معكم بالبول ماركت والبير ماركت، بالصعود وبالهبوط. كل اللي بدي اقول لكم اياه اعملوا لنا لايك سبسكرايب. البيتكوين قمه جديده هلا نحن وعم نحكي، عامل قمه جديده يعني.
it's normal at بدو كريبتو.
شكلنا كل ما نطلع عم نعمل قمه جديده. بركي لازم نطلع اكثر.
بس تعازيه للدببه البيرز.
تعازيه يا عن جد. بس ليك يعني يوم لك يوم عليك، لهم سنتين ومدري قد ايه عم يتسلوا فينا يعني. ما
بالضبط.
بالعملات البديله البيتكوين صعدت لما نكون عم نحكي، ولكن العملات البديله كانوا عم مبسوطين الدبب على فتره. خلينا هلا نحن ننبسط شوي.
بالضبط 100%.
ليك بس خلينا نحكي كمان بواقعيه. ما لازم تكونوا دبب او ثيران بشكل دائم، حسب معطيات السوق وحسب السوق كيف عم يفرجيكم. لازم تقدروا تقلبوا مواقفكم على هالاساس. مره ثانيه بشكركم. مره اعملوا لايك اعملوا سبسكرايب، ونحن بنشوفكم قريبا اذا الله راد فيديو جديد وماركت ابديت جديد. ثانك يو خي عمر.
شكرا.
يلا حبيبي.